Welcome to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm your host, Sean Kneese. On this show, we have off the cuff and candid conversations about the big topics in the world. So, history isn't just about what we remember, it's also about what gets erased, suppressed, or absorbed into something new. Today, we're looking at one of the biggest shifts in history: the fall of the classical world and the rise of imperial Christianity. Our guest has been digging into what was really lost during this transition, how entire traditions, philosophies, and ways of thinking were either wiped out or reshaped into something unrecognizable. From the intellectual melting pot of Alexandria to the destruction of the Serapeum and the murder of Hypatia,
Hypatia.
Hypatia,
You're
he's
probably
here to
closer,
break it
actually.
all. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's here to break it all down. Afterwards, we'll discuss how this still shapes the world we live in today. So let's get into it. Welcome, Eric Sanchez, here to talk about the exile of wisdom.
Right on. Well, thanks, Sean, for having me. And there are lots of terms from this time that I probably mispronounced too. So sorry to just jump on you like that.
That's right.
Afterwards, I realized you probably are closer to how it's really pronounced than my Americanized version of these names. But yeah, so I'll just jump into it here. So recently, I came across a video that was talking about Coptic Christianity and the remnants of the ancient Egyptian religions that were still present. They still speak, or Coptic is also the name of the last version of the ancient Egyptian language that was more or less eradicated at a certain point, but maintained itself, much like Latin in the Roman Catholic Church, like a liturgical language. They still use it in their prayers and within their services and ceremonies. There's a couple other things that they have in there too, but including like the ancient Egyptian calendar, and there's other rituals and iconography and customs that are still very much a reflection of those ancient Egyptian rites and rituals. And one of the videos, the guy was talking about how the tonality of certain hymns are the same way in which they would have hymns to pharaohs. So that kind of got me thinking a little bit into wondering what else survived. What else survived, not just from ancient Egypt, but perhaps from the classical world, and what exactly happened? What was absorbed, what was distorted, and what was erased, but also what was that moment? What was that process? You go back like a little bit. I think most people know about the transition from in Rome under Constantine when he converts to Christianity, and that thereby emphasizes the one, there's now one religion for the entire Roman Empire. But that didn't happen overnight, and there was a lot more to the transition than I think we usually hear about. There were entire ways of thinking, frameworks, and the way in which people understood reality that were erased. And in order to understand what we lost, we kind of want to go back for a moment and see the height of the pre-Christian world, what was happening there, and then we can see how the tensions grew between that Christianity and how we got to today. So the first place we really want to talk about here is Alexandria. Alexandria was a city. It was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. It's a really interesting. It's one of the first well-planned cities. It's on a grid. It had utilities. There was a water system that connected much like our modern utilities and cities. And Romans did have a lot of engineering around aquifers and other sort of public works, but I'm not sure if it was the first, but it was one of the biggest planned cities. There was not a city, not a town, and built out the the grid, much like you would look at like Upper Manhattan, and how you can see how the streets are planned sort of on a grid. It was a multicultural, had a multicultural population. Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Persians, Indians, and it was a global trading hub connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. During its height, it was more than just a modern city, something like New York, where there's a lot of trade and commerce going on, but it actually was a blending of the different philosophies and religions of the time. So you had Greco-Roman, Egyptian, some Persian. You had early Christianity. Sometimes people talk about like proto-Orthodox, which becomes the ultimately state religion. But you also had what people refer to as like Gnostic Christians, as well as Jews. And I don't really know the like Islamic influence in there. I'll figure that part out at some point too. I actually don't know where that fits into the story there. One of the important things to keep in mind though about Alexandrian thought, and this is really talking about the apex of the classical religion and traditions, was syncretism. And syncretism, if you think about, like, if you heard of like Hermes Trismegistus, where they take Greek Hermes and take Thoth from Egypt, and you see that while these traditions thought of these ideas independently, how they kind of map onto each other, and through
they
that
combine
idea,
it into one entity.
Yeah, exactly. And through that idea,
and they combine the mythology of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, you also hear that a lot with Rome and Greece too, or like Jupiter and Zeus, right? These ideas of finding that alignment, and through that, almost like in that pattern, they can find the truth of that spiritual insight. And so one of the centers of that thought was the Serapeum, which is basically like an annex for the Library of Alexandria. So in there, they had their house deity was Serapis, who was himself a syncretic god. So he has like Zeus, Osiris, Apis. I forget who else, but the idea is that he was this representation of multiple gods that had this sense of almost this completion idea of Osiris in the afterlife, Zeus in control over here. Asclepius, I think, was another one. So like this god of like medicine had this sort of almost what we think about with Jesus, like redemption and resurrection.
Yeah.
And so that being as a centerpiece was also not just the idea of this deity being a syncretic god, but a god of syncretism itself, like the idea of the representation of bringing these ideas together in order to find an evolution of spiritual and philosophical truths. Sorry, lost my place on my notes. Edit, cut that. So if we look at syncretism, why and how we got to a place where truth wasn't about individuals and classical spiritual traditions emphasizing a search for that understanding and an evolution and a plurality of combining ideas, to a strict, you can believe in one way, only one way, and you can't question that. And if you do question those ideas, like you'll either be exiled or killed or attacked in some form. So
that's not something that's just unique to Christianity. Christianity was that's just like one example how that was used. It wasn't necessarily like the idea itself, because like there were more because like I'm not a Christian or religious, but I mean, like a lot of Jesus teaches, like at his core, were more peaceful and like kind of like the Buddha in some ways. But it had its differences. But but it just like it ended up being like any idea could be kind of distorted and then used.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. So the next piece, which we'll get into here, and it is really important to make a distinction. So probably one of my first like, oh shit, aha moments was so much of the ancient world is still alive within current modern traditions. But my next sort of oh shit moment was that what we see or conceive of some of these modern traditions are evolutions in themselves of both those previous systems, but also, as you mentioned, how the idea becomes corrupted. If you go and if you look at Christianity at the time in Alexandria, you have Christianities. One is basically selected by Constantine to evolve into the governing and legislative body and religious system. So that in and of itself, without even an emphasis on is that good, is that right, is it wrong, what happened, shows that that system is not the system that it's based on, right? Like if there you have teachings of Jesus, there are scriptures that, I mean, the actual the canon Bible also kind of falls into the system, but the idea is that you have several different versions of Christianity at the time where followers of Jesus or people who believe in that. They didn't all necessarily call themselves Christians. But the system that sort of grew from one of those is distinctly different from just a spiritual system based on the teaching of Jesus Christ, right? It becomes a legislative body. Like, so this is where we actually get into. So Constantine, I'll hop over to that because we basically get the idea that Constantine has this vision of a cross and decides to convert to Christianity. And there's a couple interesting side. I can't decide if Constantine actually saw that vision or not, but I can say that one, Rome was falling apart. They were going through like a bunch of like leaders being like killed and transferred of power, and there's a lot of instability in their government system at the time. The people with the most power, other than the ruling class, were people who were either high in the philosophical schools or individual like temple religions or in the mystery schools. Christianity, as the strict belief in monotheism, and so not a plurality, taking away syncretism, removes that class of people, where those institutions are physically destroyed. The people are removed from power, if not killed or exiled, and now you have what was this teaching, of salvation is used to eliminate other belief systems, and in doing so, create a structure of power that is pretty much like an antithesis to what Jesus did himself. Jesus was definitely very much like a rebel in himself and talked about, undermining his belief in corruption and, the existing systems, a lot to do with like the hierarchies of some of the like Jewish systems. I don't know a lot about it, but what I do know is that one of my friends who is Jewish and has been doing some like studies in Kabbalah told me that there are some like very like, I don't know, very like Orthodox Jews who believe that Jesus is in like a hell of shit or something like that, for undermining the I don't know exactly the right words for it, but also like the Jewish laws, right? So, how you eat, Sabbath, a bunch of other orders in the hierarchy, and Jesus was undermining that. And so for them, they look at that as like, a desecrator, someone who was against their system of what they believe is like
So that's
holy
like the
and right.
most conservative sect, like the most orthodox.
Yeah. Oh, and that's not even to like put down or say anything. The point there is to say that there are those who see Jesus an undermining structure as so like as such an offense to their beliefs that they believe that he is, outcast for it.
Mhm.
I say that because to build an entire system of a rigid structure, an alternative one, not the same as that structure that he's speaking against, but another one that, if anything, is bigger and more intense, is not necessarily the, falling in line with that belief in Christ as a savior, as as a version of God itself, and here to you know take cure you of your sins. I don't know if that's the right term, but the idea is that, going back to your point of building a system that isn't aligned with the original, the roots of it ends up being this sort of corruption because it's doing exactly what that part it's based off of spoke against.
But it's interesting, like, because I feel like a lot of these ideas come from a place of like wanting, like, peace, equality, like wanting good things for the world, like a better world for people, and more connection.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how you were talking about Alexandria, how instead of like, oh, my way's right, or my way's or my way's right, and like killing people because that originally was, they kind of merged the Egyptian and Greek ideas. But it's like with the big three religions, it seems like, at least like in his early state, because I know when they first, like, there was a period where it was like they were all warring with each other.
Sure.
Like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, like all like, but the interesting thing is they all worship the same God.
Yeah.
They all believe the same stories. It's just like one book added for the Quran, like for the Islam, or for Christianity, it's the New Testament added to the Old Testament.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And so I'll make one side note, and that is, it's not that the systems in which I'm expressing in Alexandria never warred. In fact, they did war. They ended up coming together because they were at war, and Greek conquered Egypt, and then Rome conquered Greek, thereby conquering Egypt. But there's those moments of strife, and then there's that sort of integration. And so you do bring up a good point, though, because I haven't dived into it a lot, but I do. There's a lot of the connection between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, as you mentioned, almost like being like, it's like a trilogy almost, right? You have your first, and then, one that built off that, and the one came later. And certainly the ones that come later adjust, or believe that they have reasons to overwrite the rules before. Jesus is said to have been, the Messiah. Jews don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They're still waiting on their Messiah. In this case, you have this version there say Jesus was, fulfilled all the requirements of the old of the Jewish law, and so don't worry about that anymore, guys, and focus on our version. Yeah. Meanwhile, there are practicing Jews who very much stand by like that as their rules and don't believe that they're, that anything has been completed by Jesus that allows for any of those rules to change. But they do have more so, even at the time, Jew. If you look into it, there's a really famous Jew from Alexandria called Philo of Alexandria, and he was a Jewish scholar who mixed it with the Jewish theology, mixed in a lot of like the Greek Neoplatonic philosophy, and he's not apparently very well revered by by Jewish scholars of a certain period after, but very much in Christianity. I haven't dived too deeply into exactly what that is, but you can see that there's this harmony and not a, you don't believe what I believe and I will destroy you for it. So there is something there that I haven't really come to like fully understand yet, because if you do, and this is definitely a topic for another day, there's a lot of parallelisms between Christianity and some of the other religions like of the time. So there's an unsaid harmony.
It's Zoroastrianism, I think, too. Like, I know that's the first monotheistic religion.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And there, Zoroastrian is very much, more into the, I don't know if it developed or they're just in parallel, but has almost like the duality you will like evil will be overcome at one certain day in Christianity. You have like Judgment Day, and then evil will be destroyed after that. So yeah, there are parallelisms there as well. But yeah, I mean, just to go on a little bit more, our little history lesson. There's a couple points that are just worth noting. Again, the shift didn't happen overnight. But when let's see, just pull notes over here. You have was the Council of Nicaea. It was just 325. Not only Constantine basically calls on the religious leader to decide like what is canon, what is true in the Bible, and anything that doesn't fit that particular mold essentially becomes a heresy. So all like Gnostic Christianity, Valentinianism, was it what is this other guys? Marcionism, all these versions of spiritual practices that followed in with the teaching of Jesus may not call themselves Christianity. They all become heresies, and the proto-orthodox becomes the orthodox, and the rules in which they set down also establishing a principle of religious doctrine. So religious doctrine, at least in my terms, it's not in the Bible. Certain people at that time believed that it was implied that it was in the Bible, and therefore that becomes like a religious law and treated as such. So then if you are there's a couple ideas that we get from there, one of which it's like original sin. There's certain terminologies, or I think the Trinity is like a strict this is and only is God in three forms, right? These versions that you may, if you read the Bible, you wouldn't necessarily see. You can see they're implied, but they become religious and state law come from that time. And as I mentioned, including not only are we getting rid of the other Greco or Roman Egyptian religions, we're also getting rid of the other Christianities in that process. It wasn't there were people who held out, so you kind of have like your rebels trying to like not allow their history to be lost. In one of the last moments of the outer world of temple religions, you have the storming of the Serapeum, when it's basically destroyed, including its statues, burned its scrolls. This is from I can't say this name, Emperor Theodosius. Basically bans all non-Christian practices, and so leads a mob to destroy the Serapeum. There are people who camped out in it and tried to defend it, but ultimately they lost, and that was the last standing temple that was destroyed in 391 CE. Socially, these ideas stayed around for some time. We had Hypatia, who was a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer, and one of the leaders of Neoplatonism. She taught at the Library of Alexandria and is largely seen as a symbol of classic wisdom. There was a bishop Cyril, and a mob that he brought with him, dragged her through the streets, stripped her, and filleted her alive with broken pottery. It was a violent display, really, to take out one of a female leader of philosophy and ancient wisdom, and to murder in such a public way was one of the last nails in the coffin of the resistance of maintaining that old the classic world. So just after that, basically philosophy became theology, spiritual knowledge really became doctrine, science, inquiry, and personal gnosis, so your own, whether it's not necessarily Gnosticism, but your own personal spiritual divine journey, weren't just thought as this thing that you shouldn't do, is criminalized. Like you can either be jailed or killed for engaging in any of those activities. Another really interesting thing to bring up from that time too was that a lot of which also a topic for another day is the topic of like magical practices, theurgy, any sort of like incantations and wisdom and personal practice of what we would call pretty much magic today. One call out here is that the church even today does that. Like even modern, like Roman Catholic Church, they have the same rituals. They're praying. There's certain rhythm. They have their incense. They are believing that the actions of their prayer will then affect the world that they're in. There are other areas that are also, other parts of Christianity that absorb petitioning or praying to certain deities and entities directly for them. So you have saints, you have mummified saints. There are mummified saints. There are mummies that people are praying to as a deity to impact their life. They do within the church these magical rituals. They don't call it that. It's a ritual. It's a they'll call it venerating the saint.
Well, and a lot of the religions have that like magic or occult sect to it, like Judaism, Kabbalism, Hinduism. I know had I forget what it was called. They have like an occult. And then you mentioned Christianity. Islam has Sufism.
Sure, yeah.
And I know this. I believe when I was looking at, because I was looking at like the old Sufi poets like Hafiz and Rumi. I believe like some of the Sufis were persecuted, if I'm not mistaken. Because that's, I want to make sure like I don't say anything that's not true.
Yeah, but certainly, I mean, Christians were persecuted. Obviously, this is an entire discussion around the persecution of the non-Christians of that era. Jews have been persecuted in many ways over many, eras, different times with different governing bodies that they were in.
Yeah, but I know the Sufis were talked about, like, the direct experience of God, like, the divine and everything, like, and the Kabbalah is about, like, for Judaism is about the tree of life and the different the different like realms of God, or like there's the tree of life, the separate, it's like the different realms of existence, and I'm just going by like what I remember of it, but like every religion has like that section. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that Christianity in its early form openly had a lot of that. So if you look at what the Gnostic traditions generally was called Gnostic, I won't get into what is or isn't Gnostic because that's like a whole other debate. If those we call Gnostic today actually consider themselves that, but Gnosis literally it's like that personal divine revelation, and is something that was explicitly suppressed in the transition to imperial Christianity, but was very present in early Christianity. And it's that same thread of that personal divine revelation, and arguably in the suppression of the other religions and traditions of the time, imperial Christianity also suppressed these other parts of Christianity that leaned into the personal divine knowledge. And so you have what is...
I think it's also that the reason for that, though, is that why it was done, like, in ancient Christian, why the mystics were persecuted in Christian society, or like the mystics in like ancient Islamic society, or I think the reason why they persecute them is because they I think people in power, it's like they're worried about something that, like a spirituality or religion that liberates people.
Absolutely.
And like it helps them like be the highest individual they can, and they want to make it about controlling people. So that's why they take the doctrines and take it in very literal ways and very rigid ways. And I think a lot of these religions are actually just more like metaphorical or more allegorical.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big, the other oh shit moment that I have with Christianity, and then understanding that it is this sort of other thing than what it started as. We call it it's almost part of the distortions here are just saying like Christianity is a singular term, but that imperial Christianity is not the same as those like original pieces. And in those, you have a huge emphasis on your personal knowledge. and in suppressing that, they take the parts that are external. So you have the outer part, which is the salvation, right? And then you have, which is the sort of, I guess, the divine knowledge maybe given to you and that you accept. But there's also like the internal part. And so they take this little piece and they kind of put it inside of this big box that is like, you have to basically, give us your mind, body, and soul in order to access this, right? There's one little piece of maybe truth in there. Meanwhile, outside of that box of control is you just finding that divine experience on your own. Well, then that doesn't work with their model of control. So they need to also suppress that externally in order to keep you as an individual or other groups of people throughout time from finding that divine knowledge and independence of their system on their own. If you look into what narcissistic personality disorder is, like a true narcissist, how they operate and how they affect other people, it's literally, you have a microcosm, macrocosm. They're a very similar process of establishing control, distorting truths from your end, getting into literally your mind and changing the way in which you even think towards yourself, about yourself when you're away from them, right? And it's the same model that you get in the version of imperial Christianity, which starts you off with original sin. That's not in the Bible. But if you're born a sinner, you already need them, right? So there's no out there, right?
Yeah.
So you already need to go. And this is another one too. They
also, like, I don't understand why they say now, like, that the Bible said life starts at the moment of conception. Like, they didn't even have the concept of conception like we do now when the Bible was written. So
I don't know this one for sure, but from what I've seen, I would almost bet that it doesn't explicitly say that. The Bible does explicitly say a lot of, controversial things. There's a lot of, I don't know. There's a lot of, it's not, I'm in defending the idea that that's not explicitly there doesn't mean that there aren't explicitly things that are maybe, destructive or problematic in some way. But I would imagine that there probably is some interpretation of some line that says this is our official interpretation, so you must believe it in that way. But I'm not sure on that one exactly. But yeah, I mean that actually brings, the theme of this sort of clunky walk through history here is that exile of wisdom, that part, that inner knowing, that inner knowledge, the wisdom within systems that say how things actually operate in a way in which can adapt and develop and over time and isn't exactly constrained to an authoritative, strict box, which actually doesn't adjust with people and changes in time and evolution. That part of that wisdom, that inner knowing, is what has been suppressed and replaced by almost like a cold, formless a system that's not formless. It is very much formed, but it's very rigid, very mechanical, and doesn't really take into account an individual, their own experience, and their own divinity as all being a piece of creation. There's no, in my opinion, and this is also something that changes in doctrines, there's nothing that's not God. Everything is a piece of a totality that is of, a creator. Yeah. Which, if you get a little technical, it's more of like a pantheist view. God is everything, but God also transcends everything. Versus the what is it? God's omnipresent, but it's ex nihilo. I forgot to say it. God created from nothing a world separate from him, but can see it all. And so there are things that's somewhere that's not God, and there are things that are not God within God. It's actually, these
but
are
like, why would he make, like, and then they say like all this stuff that's bad, like, that you do, but it's like, why would God even make any of that stuff if it's wrong? Like, and also like the whole, like, he gave us free will, but if you don't do as he says, you'll go to hell. It's like, what kind of free will is that?
That's not. And actually, that's a really interesting one, because talk about how, now I'll say this first and foremost, like, I don't necessarily like, even in the freedom part, and each their own. I send you love too, but like proper, like, Satanist, right? But one thing that I will say that's not really a part of that, but kind of does play into, could be turned that way, is to say, the thing that
Wait, you're
the
talking about like Levin Satanism, or like
but
Anton
what I
LaVey, that's, and I know that that's actually atheism, right? That's like more
I mean that
self,
there's a little
yeah,
bit of a
because I know that
troll
there's
thing going
theistic
on.
Satanists who actually
Yeah,
like worship Satan, and then
like
there's
they don't. They're
Levin
they're
Satanism, yeah,
right. And so I mean to almost try and sidestep that conversation, but the reason why I bring it up is to say that in Imperial Christianity, it's like angels are supposed to have. They say they don't have free will, but there's one who does take his own free will, and that one becomes a devil, right? So they demonize the idea of free will explicitly in that
yeah,
narrative, where it's similar to saying what you mentioned about humans. Well, why have free will if you're supposed to um, only choose this particular way that they're declaring? Then why would God even give you that? And in the Imperial Christian version, they take free will as like a satanic thing. So
yeah.
it's just another angle of repression.
They twist it in a way that makes it so they can control
Right.
people.
Yeah.
And that hasn't just been with religion. That's been with like political movements too, like
Sure.
communism, which was supposed to be, workers' control of production, kind of just uh, I guess depending on what it was, like a stateless, classless society. At least that's more like the more anarchist view of that. Just like
Sure.
yeah,
And
but then when people get in power, they twist it in a way where it's like, okay, I own everything. The Stalinists and the the Maoists, and like it became a way to control people,
absolutely,
and
yeah. I mean, in any of these systems, it's where it's as if there's this, this density. It's like this whole thing is meant to um, care about individual, our rights, our freedom, even our own, sometimes like consider our own divinity. And then it's like it gets rotten in the core, and it's just this shell that's left over that keeps presenting as if it is that thing, and yet does, atrocities in the name of that. And generally you have a class of elites where those rules don't even apply to. I'll give you one going back to, if you go back to the time of Constantine, his god, which he prayed to of the Roman gods, was Sol Invictus, which is basically the sun god, which is the sun god of their time. But for their class, for the ruling class, they actually maintained for quite a while the their own traditions with that. So even though everyone else is repressed and you weren't allowed to, we'll kill you if you, you know, continue your followers of like ISIS or Mithras. But they did, right?
yeah.
They still
And I
followed
hate
the
how
gods 'cause they were above those
ISIS.
laws.
I hate how ISIS, the terror group, kind of tainted that name of
Oh
the
yeah,
Egyptian
it's funny. I've been sort of
guy.
into this for especially the Egyptian stuff, like for long enough. I forget that that's a reference to, like, at first, like I go to the god first, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a way to sort of taint that name as
yeah.
well.
Well, and
But
then of course they're another example of taking in a belief system that could be used in a peaceful way, or like had that some people follow in a more peaceful way, and taken to an extreme to oppress and kill people.
yeah, and it happened. I mean, the one of the okay, oh shit moment number 4, or I won't count them because in case you edit it or whatever. But another oh shit moment was that almost any time that there's a system that's developed to overcome a system that's oppressive, that's corrupt, it itself becomes corrupted. It's almost like in the Matrix how they keep building new matrices. Like it's just
Yeah,
like whatever system overcomes eventually ends up falling into this system of it itself becoming becoming um, it's like the live, die a hero,
it's
or live long enough to see yourself become a villain. It's like it always becomes the villain.
well, and like Animal Farm is probably the most classic allegory of that, by George Orwell, which was really, it was kind of a satire on Stalinism, but it was, the animals, they rise up in this barn, they rise up against the farmer who's oppressing them, but
Yeah,
then when they take charge, they start oppressing people, and they
Yeah.
say, well, they start off as, oh, we're all equal, but then they go, oh, we're equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah. And I don't know necessarily what it's either that humanity is just doomed to repeat the cycle of the
that's what
oh,
I
it's
was
my
thinking too.
turn
Like, is it
now.
always doomed to be corrupted? Like a good
Yeah.
idea, like, can there ever,
It's like there's this inherent there are enough people who get enough power through whatever means that believe in the like might is right, or oh, now it's my turn, so if you hurt me and now I have power, like the right thing is to get that revenge, almost like an eye for an eye sort of thing.
Yeah,
And the problem there is that it's so short-sighted too, that doesn't just happen in the moment. Now time goes on and you are oppressing this other group, who now there's kids that come up and all they see is the oppression, so they become the rulers and they overthrow you, and they say, oh, we beat
yeah.
them, and then these kids grow up and they're like,
What-
we overthrew you, and it goes on and on.
and when and growing up, it took me a long time to see that, like, wait, we're not America. What hasn't always been the good guys, like, because
Oh
you're
no,
raised.
yeah,
I
I
was
mean
raised
that's
kind of indoctrinated to that we're always the good guys, and then there's just these bad guys, like,
yeah,
kind of like these cowboy Indian, like, like that you see in the movies and the stuff, like
sure,
the old action
yeah,
movies. But then it's like, as I grew up, it's like, and I like studied this stuff more from like other perspectives and listen to other people's perspectives from like other parts of the world or whatever. Then I'm like, wait a minute, there's people there that were viewing us as the bad guys, like
sure,
like when we
yeah,
came in and invaded Iraq, like
yeah.
we were just this army that came out of nowhere and just like
It's
overthrew their
yeah,
government that had
that's
nothing to do.
one of the I think, it's one thing to think like historically, be like, oh wow, I can't believe our country did that, but we're past that, right? It's another one to see something like in your lifetime. And
Yeah,
I mean, I'd love for someone to explain to me how the United States uh invading Iraq is, you know, not the same as, let's say, Russia invading Ukraine, right? Like,
yeah,
how is that like? And that doesn't defend the other side too. That doesn't.
no,
I'll never go like people I've heard before. While Saddam Hussein was doing these like
yeah,
horrible things, and his children doing horrible things, I'm not defending that. Saying that
yeah.
one thing is wrong doesn't mean the other one is right.
Well, it's
Um,
like it's like if you say like, oh yeah, well we dropped napalm on civilians in Vietnam War, but then it's like, oh well, at least we're not like cutting people's heads off like that. But it's like,
yeah,
that's really like, aren't they both bad? Like, just that kind of weird
yeah. And the thing
way
that
of looking at it, that like it's worse if it's done in a certain context. Like killing
yeah,
children's okay if it's done like from an airplane with a bomb,
yeah,
but like doing it, but if you do it up front, then it's like more evil. It's like
yeah. I'm right there with you, man. And there's a part of me that like it feels a little sad in that like I think that people grow from acknowledging their mistakes or their faults, right? If you, as an individual, are unable to ever admit that anything you've done was a mistake or wrong or harmful, then you are, by definition, always just going to continue that harm because you have no measure to not do that. Again, back to sort of like the narcissist who always has this view of they're here, you're here, they have a plan, they're in control, they're right. If you deviate from that, like, you're evil or bad or wrong, whatever version that might be. But it's like
you know,
that's a person who never learns and always harms people continuously throughout their life. And I think that if as a country or as a society, you can't say like, wow, that's bad. We did that wrong. We shouldn't do it again. Then you're going to repeat it. The counter force to that is this system that like, you can't ever admit fault because then you'll seem weak, which to me is a weaker thing. But there's, I guess, enough people that do you see that as a weakness? I'm not really sure, man. That one gets me a lot too because I don't. It's kind of one
yeah,
of those moments you're like, I don't understand the world. Like I really don't. Like
yeah,
how if someone can't admit weakness as a group in society or an individual, your immediate reaction isn't, wow, they're really corrupt and weak and can't even handle being wrong and improve. It's, wow, they're strong because they're never wrong. Like I don't
yeah. Like,
actually
how is
follow.
that like? And what's wrong with being wrong? Like, we're human, of course we're going to be wrong.
Yeah,
So yeah. But I
Yeah,
was thinking like how like even look at like how like fascism came to power, like how Hitler came to power. It's like it's because like what it starts from people feeling like they're on the down.
absolutely.
Like Hitler, like Germany was in a terrible like
Yeah,
depression, like worse than anything we've even ever seen in
sure,
our lifetime.
100%. I
And
mean, it
like
was
then
yeah,
Hitler, like he was from the poor classes, and he like that's kind of comes with that's also like the
yeah,
dangerous side of populism, because like
sure,
Hitler was a populist, but then
yeah,
populism could also like grassroots movements or populism can give rise to like a
Ev-
Martin Luther King, or it can give
yeah.
rise to an Adolf Hitler. But
Everything.
like
There's
that's not,
no. I don't think there's any. There might be systems that are, inherently evil, but I don't think there's a system that is uncorruptible and therefore inherently good. Every system is corruptible, and in fact, if anything, it does bring into question that the ones that have been corrupted, um, to really understand what their source were and how they were corrupted in order to avoid that again. Hitler one's a great example, right?
yeah,
I mean, if you know the story, it's like I don't know if this is true or just a myth, but it's like people were like starving, and he would like have like
yeah,
bread at his talks. He would just have bread, and then because people came to get a bread, they'd hear him giving one of his like
yeah.
lectures or screaming about whatever he did, the way they did it. And it's because there's that opportunity made by one other system that probably was being. I'm sure there's some corruption there and putting the whole blame of World War I on Germany, throwing
Yeah.
them into a depression is like some sort of scapegoat, which allows
And
the
then punishing them
opportunity.
with like treaties Versailles and all that.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
that allows the opportunity for, it gives a chance for someone like Hitler to grow. But even then, the Hitler to grow part isn't explicitly wrong or bad in the, oh God, don't edit that wrong.
yeah,
That's not what I'm saying. Um, the part where Hitler says, I hear you and I'm supporting you and look
yeah.
what those people did to us and here's food and we're great and we're worth it to like work them up. That
And then
that
get them demonize another and
right,
other. There's always the
right,
other.
right, right.
There's
Now
the us
they
and
think
there's
another.
them.
It's that
Yeah,
cycle, man.
yeah.
But that
And it keeps us away from the divine truth that like there is no us and them. It's just there's like an us.
that is true. Yeah, there
Yeah,
really is only like a collective us.
yeah,
Even in I like to think about this too. I'm very comfortable now with the term God, but I don't always need necessarily a Christian version. But I do say like hermetic, all, source, monad, one, like that is a starting point. And in that understanding, there is nothing that is not God. And as individuals,
yeah,
we are
yeah.
all far more aligned than we are, I think, necessarily meant to
Well,
be against each other, but we're also really easy to manipulate, to look for a scapegoat, to look for something to blame, to not have that same process that we're mentioning of seeing your wrongs and improving. Why improve when I could blame something else, right?
yeah, and but being able to blame yourself would lead to less terrible things happening than pointing to the other because you usually point to the others. Yeah,
Right. And there's this idea, which again I think it's just I personally I do think at least is it's a legacy of that sort of that imperial Christianity part that I mentioned, of that sort of corruption where we define what's good on our terms, and if you are not that, then you are a problem. Ends up building a system where you can't say you're wrong because everything you do is right because you said it,
yeah,
right? And so, but that's just not reality. And so you end up with this constant, it's like a Sisyphean thing where, oh, we finally got, beat them because they are wrong, and they're finally, they have their, was it, uh, whatever demise or narcissistic collapse is like when the narcissists kind of lose and they fall out. Oh, we beat them, but then the next thing just comes up and starts with this same process again. And so, um, yeah, I don't know,
yeah. And I was
man.
also thinking like I made this point a little bit before, but I didn't really like a lot. Like it depends on like when there's times like that, like and the charismatic leader comes around. Sometimes it's like a malevolent figure that comes, but then sometimes it's like then sometimes it's like a Martin Luther King or a Gandhi, but it's like
Sure,
the same person could step in. You know what I
sure.
mean? Like
But
in that
sometimes you
situation,
get someone who starts off, maybe they're good.
Like it could be a good type of charismatic leader that steps in, or it could be the malevolent type.
Yeah.
It depends on who comes in and takes control of that energy. Is what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
because there's
I
been
think
like good figures in history and like more like malevolent figures in history that kind of came out of the same, I
sure.
guess, atmosphere or climate.
Yeah, and it's not always black and white. I mean, that's definitely true, but I think, something I hear too is like Saddam Hussein, while corrupt and pretty vile in his own way, actually kept a lot of the strife and turmoil that we'll see now in the
Yeah.
Middle East between like ISIS and a lot of like these other like terrorist groups were things
Yeah.
that he, in his sort of
Yeah.
authoritarian power, also were able to kind of keep that under control. And once he was removed, they all start fighting for power, and it
Yeah.
all, it really explodes
Yeah.
into.
But like I like it, but then like at the same time, then he was doing like a genocide against the
Yeah,
Kurds and everything. But then at the same time, it's like that wasn't like all we did was like destabilize the whole Middle East. Like
that's
we
what I'm
didn't offer,
saying, and so that's what like.
we didn't give them freedom. We just gave them more suffering. Like
Yeah, I would
yeah,
say there's many ways to be wrong, man. Like just
yeah,
because one thing, like if you're like, oh well, you know, like in this case with the United States, well, you destabilize them. It's like, well, look, he was doing something wrong, but we also did something wrong. Like you can both be wrong.
yeah.
Like that. I
Like
think
both things
often
could be
people
true at the
forget that
same
like
time. You know, it's
both
like
people can be wrong, or both
yeah,
parties can be wrong in a situation.
yeah. That's
But
why it's like because like the Cold War, it's like okay, was it really evil Empire Russia and like good US, or was it more gray than that? You know?
it always is more gray than that, man.
Yeah.
Someone said, I think there was like a meme or something I saw recently that was like, um, the the best like fuck, you can edit this too, but something to the effect it's like two people at a bar and they're talking about propaganda and someone's like country, and then they ask, it's like, oh well, how do you feel about it? And they're like, oh, in the US we don't have propaganda. Like, whoa, you got the biggest
Yeah.
propaganda going on if you don't think there is any.
But it's also interesting, like how people, like I'll also sometimes notice people will point out people being susceptible to propaganda and stuff in
Yeah,
the U.S., but then they're susceptible to the propaganda of their side and
everyone
their
is. Yeah,
biases. It's
yeah,
like the right wing will like point out, oh yeah, the liberal media in this, but then they'll buy into whatever
yeah,
right wing pundit says. Like
100%,
so, it's
man. To me it's so crazy because it's like, you know uh if you take a point, it's hard when like if you're only standing on, well, like it was like, I think when Joe Biden was first elected, and we were like, well, oh man, he's like, in cognitive decline,
I
he's too
sometimes
old, and I'm
forget he
like,
was president because he didn't have like a presence. Like
yeah,
Obama had a presence.
sure,
Trump has a presence that
that's a whole
I
other thing, yeah.
not for me, but yeah,
But yeah, at the
but like
time,
yeah,
at least this is my view, where it was like, well, I agreed that maybe Biden's not that great, but you do realize, and controversial point, I guess now, it's like the last guy tried to overthrow the government. So when you are saying that this one's not that great, on your side has also something so much as not great, I think that you would at least address it in your comment, right? You're like,
yeah,
well, I know that this is really bad, but this is bad, because there often is this implication that, like,
yeah,
when you can establish, when it's pretty clear lines who's on what side, well, when they say something about the other, the implication is that, oh, well, their sides actually would have been better at
yeah,
it. But when there's this, like, to me, a very much like elephant in the room, it's like, yeah, I see your point, but are we not going to talk about how, like, if that person wasn't president, that the one that tried to overthrow the government would be president? But
yeah,
that's also a very
yeah,
controversial point, and
or yeah, or even
yeah,
going back to like when Bush left office, like if Obama like did like expand the Patriot Act, and then he was like it did like NDAA, which was like detaining Americans um without like indefinitely detaining, and Trump's doing all kinds of like bad shit too. I don't like
yeah,
I'm critical of each president, like I'm
yeah,
consistent,
yeah,
but a lot of
100%.
people, it's like if you criticize something Obama did, it's like, oh well, Bush was doing that, and then when Trump came in and you criticize him, it's like, oh well, Obama was doing this and this and that. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's why can't you just be consistent with your principles, like, and call it out no matter
Yeah,
who's doing it? It's like
I feel the same way, man. It definitely is like, I'm well, not only try and be consistent, if, let's say we were discussing, I made up a point and you were like, well, you know, that is pretty inconsistent with what you said before. Be like, thanks for calling that out. I got to go think about that. I got to go assess why I feel this way in one case, but in another case, I'm like seemingly okay. Where's the hypocrisy, right? Or did I not
Because
explain
people are
it so you
more
don't
with their
actually?
egos, like being right, and it's also, I think, the way people market themselves, especially in media, like because that's where you see a lot of like these debates publicly and stuff. It's because like they get, that's how their brand is, that they
Yeah,
gotta support this and this and that, and if they waver from it, then they lose their audience, they lose their brand, so they
yeah.
can't have like an honest conversation
But
because
that falls
then they
into
lose
that.
their brand. You know?
Yeah, that those
Yeah,
conversations by that nature aren't honest. And then if they're not honest, then what are they? I mean, fucking propaganda, Like
yeah. You're
what's a
just like
non
pandering to a certain group. Like you're trying to make money off a certain narrative you're pushing. Like
Yeah.
that's
And the thing that really gets me about a lot of this, that there often are, we will take so much of this stuff at face value, not recognizing that a lot of the talking heads and people out there, I mean, it's just their job. And in doing their job, like, they are saying what they need to say because that's what they need to say for their job, and they make a lot of money for it, and they really don't necessarily care about the impact. I mean, I feel like if I were to think about, like, who actually cares despite, like, regardless of how they're presenting themselves. I mean, Jon Stewart maybe is the only person I think that, like, comes to mind who will just, like, say things as he needs to say them regardless of whether that makes him look good or bad or anything, but in the public
yeah.
light.
Well, I also like how Jon Stewart doesn't try to like belittle anybody else. Like he always, I feel like whoever he talks to with respect. Like even if he
Yeah. Yeah, for
disagrees, you
sure.
know, he's yeah,
Well, that's one of the biggest things too, where in a bad faith argument where you try to belittle someone or talk down about their character rather than the points
yeah,
they're making, because it's easy for some to, I guess, get caught up in the, as someone watching it, on who's louder, the kind of might is right sort of thing, rather than, well, they made a point. If you don't like that point, then refute that meaningfully rather than, you know, get loud, talk in a condescending tone,
yeah.
be dismissive, talk about something else. Like,
And there's people on like the left too that are like that. Like
oh,
I
100%.
even though I agree with them on some things, like Michael Moore has that kind
Yeah.
of like obnoxious kind of personality. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, going back to Exile of Wisdom, man, like the idea where people in general would be well aware of constructing a logical argument, premises to conclusions, how that works, how you refute them, right? Like that's not necessarily common. So um it's it's no surprise in a way when those, even those reasoning skills are suppressed in a way that then as individuals who maybe are seeking points or even maybe well intentioned, like don't know how to read a bad argument from someone else
yeah.
because they just see they just see they're taking everything at face value
Yeah,
versus,
but it's also sad that it's like it's destroying relationships between people too. Like family members not talking to family members, friends
yeah,
ending friendships, and it's all because of narratives that people don't give a shit about, that who don't give a shit about them are pushing, and then they're
100%,
losing
man.
connection, real life connections with people because of
Yeah.
this bullshit. Like,
I think to fully
yeah,
absorb a point of view that you haven't personally experienced is, like it's talking heads on a news station on whatever, and to take that in like 100% is like, I don't know, man. Even if I can't even imagine where those ideas are quote unquote right, because that's the whole problem. Everyone thinks they're right. Where that is the way to process and have your inner beliefs and how you then affect the people who are close to you.
you
That
mean like without looking into it for yourself and just believing a
Yeah,
pundit?
yeah. Like you've
Yeah,
just heard someone say something on TV, and you internalize it to the point where you will turn against with 100% conviction against someone who's in your family in your life.
yeah,
I understand, there's a lot of information in the world that we don't have immediate access to. So we need some sort of proxy for that. But I'm always, one, you kind of always know there's a spin, and two, like even when I hear things that I want to hear, I'm always like be a little skeptical, right?
That's probably when you should be the most skeptical, but it's hard to do that. Like if it's something that kind of validates your bias, then that's when you're gonna
Yeah,
believe. But that's probably when you should question the most. Is like, is this true? If it's something that validates your
yeah.
bias, yeah,
You know what? I mean, I haven't done it in a while, but I used to all the time on Reddit. I would like go on politics, our politics, right, which is super liberal, even though it's like has a neutral name, and then go read like conservative. And on any topic, on anything, and you find so many interesting things, like the stories that the other side just like omits because it makes them look bad, so they don't even talk about it.
yeah,
The hypocrisy of kind of where some of their own thoughts may not, you know, based on what you said before, it's like it's okay when our people do it kind of deal.
yeah,
And there's also, I mean, there's a lot of similarities too in the we are going to like hold firmly to this idea in which our only discourse is putting else someone down because they're stupid because they believe that. And like, yeah, both sides, you're stupid because
yeah.
no, you're stupid because you believe that.
And the people aren't even getting the same facts, like you said. It's not even.
Yeah,
It used to be that we'd all get the same facts, and then we'd have different opinions on those facts.
yeah,
But now it's like different facts people are getting.
yeah.
So it's
No,
like,
that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's rough, man. And I mean, it's kind of side note. Like, I try and be aware of some things, but I also like I think that it's just as important, if not much more important, to look at your life for the things in which you have direct control over and focus on those much more than things peripheral to that. There are some people who are maybe in their life this reason to like they find that they can make a change because they actually this is important enough they could show up at a protest and make some action, and maybe that works.
yeah,
But if you're doom scrolling all day, feeling helpless that there's nothing you can do, fucking, I don't know, man. Like,
yeah. It's just like
go
it
learn a
gets
new
depressed.
skill,
It
man.
gets
That's what I do.
if you look at shit going on in the world all day, it's just like
Yeah,
depressing. And it's not like I don't think you should look away,
yeah,
but it's like if you aren't. But what are you doing? Like, are you thinking? Is that productive? Or like, are you thinking like I'm going to do something about like what is it?
yeah. No,
Yeah,
there's. I think a lot of people. I've been there too myself. And I saw people that do it who you just like doom scroll and feel helpless. Like all this bad stuff is happening, and you don't have any control over it. But it's like that's while that is true, it's also true that there are probably many things in your own personal life that if you give that much attention to and kind of filter out some of that noise where you don't have control, then your your life can improve in ways that maybe you're struggling with, right? And
yeah.
so
Well, and then if you improve your life, then you can help improve other things in the world more because you could have
100%,
more
man.
influence too.
And that to me brings it to like that's your inner growth and your inner wisdom, and that space in which like you are, you know, if you are slightly better yourself than you were the day before, people you interact with in your life may have a slightly better experience in their day because of you. Maybe you inspire them for a little something. Maybe you're one less grumpy person to them, all of
Yeah,
those things I actually think maybe feel less impactful, but are more material, like have an actual real meaning than the worrying and projecting on a lot of things that are so far out of your control that you could literally not do something about it if you tried your hardest. And if it does, and for some people that does spark them to get, like I said, maybe they do say not having control over this is enough, and they're ready to get like politically motivated and they run for some sort of office or they get more involved, and that's great too. Turning it into some action
yeah,
than
or like
just
some
the
kind of activism or something
helplessness.
like that, or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And sometimes you could see all the shit going on in the world, and it's like, you know what you can do? Go fucking do your dishes or make your bed or something. And that's, more impactful because it's like a positive material change, even though you're not like solving these like crazy problems.
yeah.
But
But I was also thinking about like just to bring it back to what we were saying before, like when you were talking about like the imperial Christianity, like saying like this is right, and
yeah,
I think now people are kind of doing that with politics a bit.
sure.
Yeah,
100%, 100%,
yeah,
man. And um, it's hard because, either side will have points that they will state why it's like, well, you know, even against the people who say, oh, both are bad. Oh, both are bad. Oh, you're even the worst kind of person, right? Because you see problems
So
with
it's
both.
like,
Like
yeah,
you
what
have
then
to
it's like, what
stand
the
on
fuck
one
do you
side.
say? It's like,
Yeah. If
yeah.
you don't, because it really,
Well, I mean, and that's true too. Both are bad. They're just bad in different ways. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, for
yeah,
sure. And
yeah.
it's I don't know about you, man. Like over here, like I try like registers like independent. I'm like I I don't know what to tell you guys. I can't like say that I fully back up one side versus another, but I will vote when I can. But it's like there is that very much similar like you brought it back to like that like imperial Christianity. This is right because you said it's right in this way. And if you even question it, well, now your problem is something that exists on either side. And that's not to say that, you know, you get attacked by the people who say, you're saying both sides are just as bad, so you're worse than all of them. Um, but,
Yeah.
you know,
But yeah, I think, yeah, and then sometimes it's something's bad because of its idea. Sometimes it's bad in spite of it. I'll just
uh,
say that before we wrap up because I was just thinking, like, on paper, communism could be like a good idea, but like Nazism, even on paper, isn't a good idea at
oh
all. So it's
yeah,
like,
no, that is a good. Well, that goes back to what I was saying too. Like
yeah,
there's certainly bad that is like irredeemably. Like you can look at that
yeah,
system and say that it's not going to work because what it's doing. But I don't think there's anything that is perfectly good insofar as there's nothing that I understand is that isn't uncorruptible. So
yeah,
anything that is seemingly good, at least looking at history, is then corrupted in some way and therefore becomes a distorted version of itself that often will then go ahead and do the very things that it stood against
yeah,
in its beginning. So that's a big question, man. If anyone knows that answer, like I'd love to hear it. I really don't know what there's always this look for another system that's better, another system that's better. It's like any system that comes up can be corrupted. How do you make an uncorruptible system? I don't know.
yeah. And I guess my final thought is, I guess it's just being more open to different perspectives, like having conversations. Maybe not being okay that not everybody has to be like the hive mind.
Yeah,
I think that's how a society stays free is with variety, with different input, different perspectives, and
yeah,
diverse. So it's like,
absolutely. That goes into, I mean, just bring it back a little bit, like syncretism. The different ideas, they may not align. They might. You can go look for the patterns. You're not coming in out swinging and say, my way is right in its completeness and its entirety, and this way and only this way. You have this has a level of rightness to me. Let's look at what's the level of rightness to you. Let's compare that a little bit, and that makes for an interesting conversation. And you don't have to agree, but you can see another side that isn't yours, and not necessarily have to feel like I have to dominate it or it makes mine wrong. Like who's right, right? Who wins? It's
yeah,
you could just see like alignment or um or parts where they don't align. And also so many beliefs are a process of becoming and unfold and change over time or respond to changes in society or an individual. So, it's it's like rightness is a moving target. So if you focus less on an absolute right and more of a like a nearness, I think it's more likely that people can find more sustainable solutions that don't just become corrupted because you're kind of holding the paradoxes sometimes, right? And if you
yeah. Rather than
can,
having one rigid way.
yeah. And again, as you said, there are some things that would be like, nope,
Yeah,
because, if you want a Nazi concentration camp, I can't meet you halfway on that. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
if you do have a group of people that are, as a group have been like oppressed and you have some leaders that are trying to rile them up, I'm going to be like, that's really good. But we got to
yeah,
watch out. You know what I mean? Because
yeah.
that's easy to corrupt. So, like, let's
Or
kind of,
someone mad because like they lost their job or they can't pay, and then maybe some leaders like scapegoating certain groups. Like that
Yeah.
person, you could be like, okay, I understand their pain. Maybe I can have a conversation and like, because they're not necessarily
Sure.
an evil person, they're just hurt. And
Dude,
they're
100%.
yeah,
100%. I
yeah,
I remember where this is a very quite a big controversial topic now, some pretty much now, but also way back where in New York, the migrants are getting bused in from, or buses are flown in from Texas, and New York quickly turned around and was like, I think it was like maybe like $1,500 a month they were giving the families in debit cards, which here it gets to a point. I understand taking care of everyone. Like if someone's
yeah,
there and under your care, you want to take care of them. I also have friends who live there their whole lives, paying taxes, can barely get any help when they need it, have literally been trying to get food stamps or rent assistance and can't do it. So they're not very happy when someone new shows up and they get money thrown at them where they've been there their whole lives and they are feeling like they are struggling and they don't have the support that they need.
yeah.
There's a lot of tension there, right?
Yeah.
And
See, but then that's someone you can have a conversation with. Like, it's not. That's why I get annoyed when when people say talk to people who disagree. Well, they're like, well, no, like we could disagree about food toppings. We can't disagree about human rights. It's like, but most fucking people agree with human rights. Like most people aren't like this far right, like Richard
yeah,
Spencer type.
no,
Like
it's there.
most people, like some people might buy into that, like get swayed by some of that stuff because, like you said, like nobody's helping them, and they see another
Right.
group, and like you can have a conversation with that person,
Sure,
be like, okay,
absolutely, and because there's
we can meet
nuance.
your needs and we can meet these other. How do we help everyone? Like that kind of
Yeah,
thing,
100%. There's
Yeah,
nuance to situations that if you're an absolutist about, then again, that's inviting corruption again. Don't question this. Have this one view and only this one view
then that's
and
going to push
Broadway.
people further to the fringe. That's going to
Yeah,
push people
100%.
further to the
Yeah, and people who
yeah,
are kind of maybe a little more indifferent to that and maybe in their lives don't see a lot of impact, but just see, I feel this pain and I see you being this like absolutist. Well, actually, I'm probably gonna, not want to align myself with that because my introduction here is seeing something that's like really flawed and not, you know, not humane or nuanced to an individual situation. And I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I think that there's a theme in the last few years where having conversations, having debates, or having questions about certain views means that you're against it and with some opposing force, and it's like that doesn't really,
yeah,
you're only going to get other absolutists on your side, and it's
yeah.
continuing these cycles. So
But it's just also fun to see. Like I won't go too much into it because like we're kind of wrapping up
yeah,
now, but when the pendulum is switched, just like how like all the people on the right who were saying, "Oh, free speech," on college campus, the left wants to censor, and then when it's the other way around, they're like, "Oh yeah, censor them, censor these
exactly,
people who say."
exactly, and that's why it's
Like
like, is a conversation? Are people having authentic conversations? Are the debates in good faith? Are they just looking for power, just looking to
yeah,
manipulate? Do they even mean what they say when they say it? Because
yeah,
they,
because they jumped on the free speech thing. A lot
yeah,
of the far right, and
yeah,
now they're being hypocrites. Now they're
yeah, and it's not to say you can't change your view, but you want consistency or a rationale behind it that would make someone thinking about it critically say that makes sense, not just believe it or you're with us or you're against us. So yeah,
yeah,
but cool, man.
yeah.
Well, you
Anything you
know,
want to close on? I guess we pretty much said all the closing thoughts we could, right? Or
sure. Yeah, no, man. Thanks for having me. It's always fun catching up with you in general.
yeah,
Um,
same here.
yeah, it gave me a reason to put some of these thoughts into form and getting out a little bit of a, little mini lecture here that I feel kind of inspired to maybe uh, polish up a little bit more sometime and, maybe share that with some other people in the future. So thank you for giving me that opportunity and that motivation, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, man. Yeah, I think this was a good chat. Definitely lived up to the description of the show I put, the off the cuff and candid
Yeah, yeah,
conversation about
no,
big topics. So
absolutely, yeah, and I
yeah,
love, thank you for rolling with my interest in the historical side, and it was fun. I think these issues really do like have, you know, they've been with our societies for a long time, and
Yeah, it
there's
changes form, but like there's a similar underlying
yeah,
theme.
but to uncover that and to kind of see the parallels, and see how we're not all that different from the problems that our
Yeah,
ancestors had in the
yeah.
past.
It's
And
probably the same on other planets too. Like,
sure,
yeah,
yeah, man, there's something I feel like there's a principle at work here, and I don't know, I haven't had enough time to like unpack it, but there's probably some philosophers or people out there who've thought about it a little bit more too, but there's definitely something happening, and I feel like where the whatever solutions are there are intentionally suppressed from us having that inner knowing and wisdom as individuals to not feed into these structure powers. Again, it feels very much, if you have the time or you ever get someone to talk about what proper narcissistic personality disorder, how that affects people,
that
it
might be
really,
actually interesting to maybe bring like a psychologist or something on to talk about that. That'd be
yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, man. It's something that I've dived into because I've been going to therapy and have discovered that most likely was my stepfather was probably like a clinical narcissist, and I have all the telltale signs of what narcissistic abuse does to people, and so I could kind of see that on a larger scale. It's the same principle,
Yeah.
So as above, so below, and as before, so again. Because bring back
Oh yeah,
wisdom.
yeah. Make the reality you want.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Well, that's about it for this episode of Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. Subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on social media. Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. That's about it for this episode. Thank you, Eric, again, for coming on. And we'll catch you on the next one.